a while ago, but this needs to be super clear. Like, props, man. You're doing some
Exactly.
really
I was
cool
just gonna say
shit,
that.
dude. Like,
Appreciate it.
Like when you said, Renaissance man, I'm like, I like the attitude here. Let's see if we can back it up. And
I
like,
know.
you're
I was
doing
like, this guy full of shit.
dude,
That's the first thing that went through my head. I'm
got
like, uh-oh.
I've got
Come on,
some-
we got the man bun routine. What the fuck? All right, let's see
hey,
where we go
dude,
here. Let's see.
Well, he's
That's a
backing
COVID
it
only
up.
thing, by the way. The
he's
man bun is temporary.
He's backing it up though, dude. This is super cool, man.
I appreciate that.
Can I tell you why I'm so impressed with what you're saying?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're listening this to. It is nice to see your smiling faces. I hope you're doing well in this pandemic. Things are crazy. Listen, this is one of those rare episodes where I come away completely reinvigorated from the field. There's the possibilities of what could be done with behavior analysis. Brett was kind enough to jump on support. He's had some other podcasts. We link all those. We've got all the show notes and things filled out so that you can go chase down the cool stuff that he's doing. But please take a minute to reinvigorate your passion for behavior analysis and listen to Dimitri and I as we learn what he does and just really put together that Brett and the team out there are doing some amazing things with behavior analysis that are really outside the box. Hope you enjoy. Today we have Brett joining us to talk about who knows what. That's kind of the fun thing about these podcast episodes. So thanks for being here, but maybe you can introduce yourself and what you do. I know that's not an easy task, man. You have a lot of stuff going on. And I guess don't feel like you need to necessarily repeat what you've maybe shared on other podcasts. We can always link out and tell people to go check those things out. But
Sure.
yeah, what's your pitch, man? Behavior analyst, do a lot of crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, man. So I'm a hopefully a renaissance man when it comes to behavior analysis, trying to push it into all these different areas and see how far I can stretch it and do some cool stuff with it. But in terms of titles and official capacities, I am the CEO of Biokinetix.fitness technology, and that is a movement and skill acquisition company that I co-founded with my godfather. And with Biokinetix, we work with either individuals who have special needs, whether they be intellectual or physical, or we work with professional athletes. Those are the only two populations that we work with at Biokinetix. And I'm also the chief strategy officer for a football media company called Pro Football Network. And my main role there, in addition to business strategy, is I have created some sports analytics that are based in behavior analysis and behavior science that are exclusive to Pro Football Network that we're kind of pumping out there, 2 or 3 articles a week, looking at NFL players and stuff of that sort. So those are the two things that are taking up my time. But of course, within those two things, there's 100 things that are happening. So, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
It's like football sabermetrics.
Yeah, kind of. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Pro Football Network, or something that I have really tried to do, and I want to give a quick shout out to my co-founders over there, my partners, Matt Canada, Matt Infante, Aaron Sutton, and Ozzy Delgado. They're great because they listen to my behavior analytic pitches and why this stuff is so important, and they let me kind of give them education a little bit. But yeah, so what I've tried to kind of focus on with what we do with football analytics is look at things that are solely in the control of the individual player, right? So when we think of our traditional statistics in the NFL, we think about passing yards for quarterbacks, receiving yards for receivers, touchdowns, interceptions, all these different things. But every single one of those things involves more than one person. You have the quarterback who throws the ball, the receiver who catches it and then runs after it, so on and so forth. And so what I've tried to do is kind of look just at the individual behavior of the players themselves, the behaviors that they're in full control over. So for receivers, it could be something like separation, right? How much separation do they get in their route? Only they have control over that type of a movement. And so coming up with a metric that takes only those things into account and then kind of ranks the offensive players and kind of decides how much are their individual behaviors contributing to the overall production of the offense. So it's not quite sabermetric-y. It's a little bit more.
Yeah, sabermetrics is a lot more about
objective, I want to
statistical
say, 'cause I
analytics.
think,
And you're talking about measuring individual performance and culminating into one amalgamation of teamwork or output. And also so that you could probably establish a better value for the person rather than
and then
having their potential value being dependent on other performers. Am I getting that?
We got you echoing a little, or cutting out a little bit.
yeah, I missed just the back half of that sentence.
I'm saying that the conventional metrics are either statistical outcomes or statistical evaluations, and these are talking about that result that are also derived from cooperative play. Yours are on individual response outputs or performances of particular skills that also would most likely actually impact the individual player's value, because as their individual performance is increased, so is their value, and also that undermines whatever cooperative statistics might be lacking for them. So it's a lot more player-centric in terms of trying to figure out, it would help them in negotiating, that's for sure.
100%. And the key word that you used that I think is so essential is the word value, right? Trying to understand what the value of these players are, right? The constant and most abundant sports debate is which quarterback is better, right? Who's the most valuable player? And in that actual award, the word value has sort of decreased in importance in determining that award. It usually goes to the most productive. But in terms of value, that's the thing we're all trying to figure out is whose favorite team, whose quarterback is the best. And you try to determine, what my quarterback is more valuable, right? Russell Wilson is consistently a high performer in the offensive share metric, which is what I called it. Whereas Tom Brady scores real low, right? But Tom Brady has probably a higher cachet in the public. And so we kind of look at those rings. That's a cooperative stat you just gave me right there, right?
He is the Thanos of professional football.
So, actually, I'm not going to lie to you.
In all fairness,
I grew up on Miami Dolphins
Tom Brady,
and so Tom Brady is someone.
Yeah.
And Tom Brady has sort of terrorized my favorite sports team. But I will tell you that having worked with NFL players, agents, coaches, blessed to learn under guys like Paul Pasqualoni, and some really, really smart football guys. And one of the things you pick up when you watch the game from that type of a lens is you start to see wow, it's more than just Tom Brady throwing the ball. There's a lot of stuff going on, and no one's talking about that. No one is giving it credit. We hear year after year, that Tom Brady is, he's throwing to a bunch of no names and nobodies and this, that, and the third. And then you look at it and you find out, Julian Edelman leads the league in separation rate 5 straight years. And that's important. That helps. And so trying to figure out where every piece of an offense fits. And it's not to take away from any one player and add to another. Right? It's not to come up with some alternate reality where Tom Brady's terrible. It's just this idea of trying to give everyone their fair shot at value and seeing where everyone kind of fits, and then it also helps us track trends, right? What kind of players are helping teams win? What kind of players are helping teams be productive? Is the big-bodied... I was
going to say, that was my thought, is that there's a lot of fun, empirical, speculative questions that you can start to ask under these when you start looking at different metrics.
I mean, yeah. Under these metrics, offensive linemen are going to start being the most highly paid players on the team.
As they probably should be, to be honest.
I mean, it's a fact. I mean, and based on whatever performance, they protect your money, they protect your points. They also take the most abuse. Their careers are the shortest. So, and football's not a guaranteed money sport, so you only guaranteed what you sign on. So they're going to definitely want to demand more money up front. And if the metrics are based on individual performance rather than team output, then it's going to put a higher value on those shortened lifespans of higher, and higher performers, because you can demonstrate empirically that they're the ones who make you win, not all the high flyers that get the endorsements or names or whatever can do the flashy shit.
And that's sort of the interesting thing that we haven't seen yet happen, right? We all know, if you follow the NFL, that the value of the running back position has just sharply declined over the last 10 years, right? In fact, a running back in this past draft wasn't taken until mid-second round. And so, when you think
I haven't watched a football game, by the way, in maybe 10 years.
Well, you're hitting the nail on the head, because I'll tell you what, as the running back position has declined, you would think that means teams are recognizing that the offensive linemen are the main drivers of the running game and the running offense. And yet offensive line salaries haven't counterbalanced with the decline in running back salaries. And so we would argue, the argument is yours, which is that offensive linemen are still undervalued. And if we start to look at these metrics a little bit differently, and we look at individual performance a little bit more on the offensive line, then maybe we can help them get a few more dollars. I mean, look, it helps.
Did you play football?
I did. I played and coached.
What position did you play?
I was a safety.
Okay.
Yeah, which is statistically one of the least valuable positions.
There's your underlying MO.
That's why I got into coaching so quick.
You know, I just started last night, The Last Dance, and there's like it looks like the whole second episode is kind of centered around Scottie Pippen and how he signed a 7-year, $18 million deal right
oh man, and Jordan was getting 30 a year.
Right before there's 2 3-peats essentially, and that's on one side of it's a money thing, but on the value side of it, man, like I bet you there's some pretty interesting things when, especially like a Pippen's role, man, when you're second, first, third, like in the league in certain areas of steals and other things like he was, and then you're paid 122nd out of everybody. Like there's got to be some interesting psychological things and things to kind of your self-value and self-worth that kind of go on. I'm interested to see. Seems like he's been all right, but I'm curious to see in that series, you know, like what sort of struggles may be mentioned.
We actually just started examining from our end at Pro Football Network. One of the writers that I brought in and kind of tried to educate a little bit on the science, the behavior side of what the metric means and how we talk about it, how we get it out to our audience. He's about a year into doing it now, and he put out a great idea this week, and we're going to start looking at it, is exactly that, is contract value, right? What does OSM tell us about who is probably the most fairly paid based on their OSM value, and who's drastically underpaid?
I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. I mean, every metric in that kind of field is about money. I mean, those people, they're human. I mean, professional athletes are human racehorses, and they're treated as such. So I mean,
they are. I can tell you that the as players come in to the league now, they're so much more aware of that than their predecessors have been. And I think over time, you know, my clients are on the younger side, 1, 2, 3 years in the league. I wouldn't be shocked to see more labor unrest, even more than there has been. But there was already a dramatic push this year to change, union representation and stuff. And I know that, to your point, it is a business, right? We kind of forget that as fans, right? We get so emotionally attached.
That's why I don't watch it anymore.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I come from a football family. So like I have a very cynical view of football in particular.
Sure.
But I mean, like, because both my cousins played for Ohio State. They were long snappers. My brother was a hot 100. The second he fucked up his shoulder, he lost everything. I fucked up my neck and had a bunch of shit go down and lost a bunch of scholarships. So like,
I'm with you.
But I mean, like, my uncle played for the Naval Academy. He was recruited for the NFL. He was recruited with Tony Dorsett. So like, I refer to it as a disease where I come from. So like, I have a very cynical view of the game of football.
Yeah.
But as a result, I feel like I understand what you're talking about pretty intimately.
I think, I grew up, as I mentioned, a diehard fan of one team, right? And once I started working closely with the players, it gave me an entirely different perspective on what these guys go through, how much work they put in. Obviously, you talked about so many different injuries that you and your family have gone through. And there is an emotional toll that it takes on the players. And that's why it's so important to try to understand for the fans to get a sense of what type of environments these guys are working within and how much that environment really does impact their performance and their responses to so many different things. It's not just learn the play, go out and run it, and the best athlete's going to win, right? If that was the case, then every time the best athlete would be the best players. And we don't see that in the NFL. And when you get to really understand these players, watch them work with them, you start to appreciate their perspective a little bit more and lose that emotional attachment to the laundry. And that's been an interesting, transition for me to go through.
Yeah, it seems like
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Not to give away trade secrets here, but I mean, like, could you give me a little bit of a taste of kind of like what's the analytic process you go through?
Yeah, so luckily the NFL makes it a little bit easier than college football does, but the NFL has a whole massive database of what they call next gen stats. And so a lot of people don't know this, but in the NFL, every single player has a chip in their shoulder pads. There's a chip in the ball, and there are RFID receivers all across the stadiums.
Oh, wow, I didn't know
and
that.
so they're able to tell you how far the ball traveled to the nearest, tenth of an inch. They can tell you how fast the ball traveled, how fast the person with the ball traveled, every single player at every single moment. And so with those next gen stats, that actually is what makes this possible, because there's things that the human eye just can't see, right? But just because the human eye can't see it doesn't mean it's not technically a behavior. And when I say can't see it, we can see a wide receiver separate. What I can't tell you is to the nearest tenth of an inch what that separation was.
It uses the measurement. Yeah.
So it allows us to be super precise. So using a bunch of the next gen stats, what I did was I worked with the coaches that I work with and the players that I work with, and I took into account what they think is very important for their offenses to be run, right? So if you're, Sean Payton and you run a version of the Air Raid and the Earhart Perkins offensive system, what are the behaviors in that type of an environment that are necessary for you to be successful as a football player? Oh, that's important. Okay, we're going to put that into the metric because that's weighted heavier than what, the random person at Pro Football Focus who's never played or never worked with the coaches or the players thinks might be important, right? So trying to be as objective and as, making sure that what we're looking at is under the complete 100% control of the individual player we're looking at. So we disregarded everything that took into account two or more players. So none of that is factored into our analytic process, and really trying to get it down to the individual. So for quarterbacks, we look at air yards only, which is how far the ball traveled in the air. Has nothing to do with what happens once the ball gets to the wide receiver. So if Tom Brady throws a 3-yard pass to Julian Edelman, he takes it 97 yards to the house. In the stat books, Tom Brady gets a 100-yard touchdown pass on his record book. But for us, he only gets credit for the 3 yards he threw the ball, because everything after that was a result of Julian Edelman.
So not to undermine what you're saying here, because I think it's pretty cool actually, and it's
Sure.
a really unique way to do what we do. So amazing. I'm kind of got some things going in my head right now. No. What I'm saying is this: is that what kind of, and I'm just going to approach this like an old school guy. What kind of criticism have you encountered from people who believe in those metrics? Because you're going to get, especially when it comes to sports, a lot of superstitious behavior. Number one,
you're flipping stuff on its head, man.
Number one, you're going to get a lot of superstitious behavior, a lot of it. Number two, you're going to get a lot of that woo-woo, hey, man, he can just control the offense. He can just set that shit to his will. And they talk about the intangibles. You just can't teach that. Right? How many times have you heard? I don't know. I haven't watched broadcast sports in 100 years, but I don't know, John Madden.
You're on the money, man.
The question is, what do they say? What is your response to that? There's no such thing as intangibles, brosif. That's called dualism. What do you say exactly?
Yeah,
I'm trying to understand.
So the challenge is, right, so the platform to be able to push all this stuff out on before we really invested, as a company for Pro Football Network in SEO, was getting as much of it onto social media as we could, right? And social media is the cesspool of American opinion and American expertise. And so when this is going back now about 13, 14 months ago, when I put out my first list, I made it very clear that I am not telling you what quarterbacks are, which quarterback is better as a quarterback than another quarterback. What I'm telling you with this quarterback is more important to his offense than this quarterback is to his offense, right? It's looking at each player in their environment and giving them value for that environment. And so
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Are you using some kind of behavioral model, or are you just looking at the culmination of all these individual
say that one more time?
Are you using a behavioral model of some kind that like an algorithm basically that says, okay, this quarterback position has X, Y, Z particular base metrics that we've identified, times Y or times whatever, B prime, contextual variable spits out, you know what I mean, this value to the overall team dynamic or whatever.
Yeah, so what I did was I took 5 of those next gen stats I was talking about before for quarterbacks, for pass catchers, for running backs, and I gave them all a weight based on my feedback from the coaches and the players as to what was important to them for those positions. And then so with that weight, then yes, it goes through an algorithm that spits out a weighted score, and that score is out of 100. And in our estimation, and I very much stress that word estimation, we display it as a percentage, right? So
we deal in probabilistic determinism, man. It is a
that's it. So so we display it as a percentage, right? So if you score a 35 or higher, right, we're kind of arguing that Drew Brees was responsible for 37% of the offensive production in that game, which would be extremely high and elite, right? Because even if you are looking at an individual person's value to the team, no player is going to have 100% because they don't catch the ball, they don't run the ball, they just throw it, right? So
so it's a relative score to other people on the team.
Yeah, that's why I was saying it's looking at a quarterback in his environment relative to a quarterback in his environment, and they're two separate environments. And so what we're trying to say is it's basically the way, in our opinion, that the MVP should be decided, because it actually looks at value, which is that word that you so greatly brought up before.
So rather than it doesn't that makes it difficult to compare, though, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? How, if we look at behavior as a result of or being affected by environmental conditions, how could you compare? And we'll use him now, and we've been mentioning him a lot, but now that he's playing in Tampa under Bruce Arians runs a very aggressive system, right? So when you look at quarterbacks like Jameis Winston, he consistently leads the league in average yards per attempt. Right. So air yards, how far he's throwing the ball down the field every single time he throws, where Tom Brady's like at the bottom of the league every year of that. Those are two different environments, because Bruce Arians is asking his quarterback to throw the ball that far, where the Erhardt Perkins system that Josh McDaniels runs, that he learned from Charlie Weiss 20 years ago, doesn't ask for that. It asks for more intermediate and short routes. So those are two different environments. How could you compare a performance when they're being asked to do two totally different things? And that was the question that I wrestled with when I came up with this, is how do we do that? And the question becomes value. Is what Tom Brady's being asked to do, how good is he at doing that? And is it more valuable to his team than what a Drew Brees is being asked to do, and how well he's performing at that?
That was going to be my question. That was going to be my question. So then it is spitting out an actual value metric relative to the context of the particular player, rather than just some kind of like lacking specific contextual interpretation. I don't know, setting.
Yeah, exactly.
Parameter.
Exactly. And that's exactly the thing that we're trying to fight against in this, what's becoming a pretty saturated field of sports analytics, which is, as a behaviorist, we try our best not to make assumptions, right? Or we try our best not to make guesses or assign a value to something that we couldn't possibly know or observe. Everything that we try to grade is observable. And so when you tell when like to your point, when they say, oh, he has total command of the offense. Well, fuck yeah. I mean, he's been in the offense for 20 years. You hope he's got command of it, right? But that's not something we know, right? There's a and I'm not going to throw shade at anybody specifically, but there's a metric out there that's pretty popular with an upstart kind of media company like ours, and it's called the QB context or something like the QB index. And one of the things that they grade on is how well a quarterback did after he moved off of his first read. Okay, and unless you have the playbook, how do you know what the first read was? Right? But there are so many metrics.
Well, and also the first read is relative to every team they play.
Exactly.
So it literally is more like what?
Exactly.
That would mean like you would have to have like a set pattern that you're reading off of so that you can actually get like a predictive performance pattern from that for it to actually matter. So that's an idiotic metric. Yeah.
But our audience, right? I always go back to the line from one of my favorite movies, The American President with Michael Douglas. And there's a scene in there where he's fighting with his guy, Michael J. Fox is in this role. And Michael J. Fox yells at him, people are thirsty, dying in the desert, and they're drinking the sand. And Michael Douglas tells him they're not drinking the sand because they're thirsty. They're drinking the sand because they no longer know the difference. And that's where we see from our audience right now is there's so much shit out there that they don't know what is good or what's bad. They're going to who's got the blue check mark, who's got the clout, who's today's highest, engagement that I want to follow. Oh, he's got, 80,000 followers. He's got to know what he's talking about.
Isn't that business though?
It is. And that's why it's on us, our metric is only as good as the people who trust in it and the people who reference it and use it. And so it's on me to make sure that we get that out there and that we start having it become part of the colloquial conversation.
Do you have any predictive outputs from your metric? Or are they purely value ratings?
So for year one, we only put them out as pure value ratings. This year, for year two, we are introducing a predictive element using standard acceleration charting.
Oh,
I mean, that's your home run. That's your home run.
Oh, yeah.
If you get... Sorry, Ryan, go ahead. I've cut you off like 3 times, brother.
No, you're good. I've got some stuff to bring up in a little bit, but let's finish this vein. So the predictive portion of this is clearly going to make or break y'all, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So, one of the things I've been doing this whole entire off season is looking at the last 2 years of OSM scores. Our OSM database goes back to 2016. And so what I've been doing is I've been putting in 3 or 4 weeks, and then I've been using the standard acceleration charting to pinpoint what the next week should be, and then seeing how close I get once I put it in, and doing that week after week. We're also going to be introducing it for fantasy football this year as well, looking at fantasy football scores and using standard acceleration charting to come up with a bounce, to come up with acceleration pinpoint. And being able to offer something that no one else is offering in the fantasy market, which is if I could tell you reliably that this player is going to score, his ceiling is here, his floor is here, and this is right about where he should score, and player B has a lower ceiling but a much higher floor, and you're in need of somebody to score you a certain amount of points, you're going to go with the guy who's got the narrow bounce rate, right? Because he's more reliable to hit somewhere in there, where the guy who can score 5 or 30 because his bounce rate's, X4. And so, so to answer your question, that we're headed that way. But it's one of those things where if you're going to do it, you better goddamn well do it right, because you will get eaten alive out here on these Twitter streets. So,
well, I mean, dude, fantasy football guys are insane. They made a fucking TV show.
Oh, it's rough, man.
I mean, I don't know if did you watch that show? I'm sure you do fantasy.
The league,
right?
Yeah, man.
I mean, dude, they made a ridiculous television show.
I haven't done fantasy. I haven't done fantasy in like 2 or 3 years. The last time I did fantasy, I was actually in the league with Matthew Berry of ESPN, and I came in second. And I was like, "Fuck this, I'm done." And but since then, what I started doing, I really went heavy on standard acceleration and precision teaching in the last 2 years or so. And all of a sudden, that was another thing that popped in my mind. I was like, "Oh, there's got to be other cool things we can do with this." And so I started looking back at OSM, and I started looking at fantasy, and all of a sudden it became a thing. And I'll tell you, one of the things I'm going to launch in the next couple months. So first of all, Biokinetix, my other company, we're going through a rebrand. We're going to rebrand ourselves. We're going to call ourselves the Behavior Movement, which is sort of a double entendre there, because we deal mostly in movement, but we're hoping to start a movement. And one of the products that we're going to launch out of that is something we're going to call the Sports Behavior Journal. And this is stuff that we're going to hopefully feature in there, make it a part of Pro Football Network and what they offer on their site, and really start to see if we can drive this stuff out there and get it out to the masses any way we can. Doing podcasts like this is a great way to do it. If other people are out there doing this, we want to feature you in the journal and do things like that. So, we'll see.
I've actually got an old standard acceleration chart of some basketball metrics that I was looking at a few years ago. I would totally down a nerd out and share that with you in chat sometime.
Would love to.
Yeah, man. I guess a few things here. So, bringing in the standard acceleration chart. If anybody hasn't heard of it, we're gonna link to in the show notes, of course. It was still, I think, still reigns as the only like validated tool. They actually took data down to the color of the lines and the chart and things like that. And I've always been a big fan of it. Not a big fan of people shoving it down people's throats with like the avid charters out there, but it's valuable, man. It's super valuable. And this is like a perfect use case for it too. When you're trying to get really predictive with things. The use cases that we were running into was really similar. So the coaches, for the most part in basketball, are going off some superstitious things or like some biases of some sort. So like a player might mess up a few different times in practice, and when it comes to game time, they're like, yeah, you ain't getting your game time right now or your play right now, and it's like, that's not how we should be basing these decisions.
Right.
So I would take some real-time data in the moment on the bench, dropping them on standard acceleration charts or benchmarking like what their rates were relative to practice and past games, and help just kind of aid. So for example, you'd have a player that was scoring like 3 or 4 points per minute in basketball, which is like really fast.
Right,
But
Steph Curry.
and has one steal maybe over like a 5-minute period, and that one steal was the thing that the coach was like, you're out of here. And it's like, nah, like I think you might want to keep this player in for a minute.
Right,
and it was things like that I'd kind of look at. And it was by no means definitive, but it was just like, if I had something valuable to say, I'd speak up. Or if there was some agreed upon metrics that he wanted to know every once in a while, I'd yell at him in his ear. And during that time, though, this is what I want to ask you about. During that time, I started reading. I basically networked myself into a position to be able to like start collecting some data for free, volunteering as, I think I called myself a data scientist or some shit during that. But I started my research literature review of what was going on, and I found a lot of cool stuff, particularly around the early 2000s in basketball. Some things going down in MIT and other places, and then it was pretty clear that those guys got sucked up into the professional realm in the NBA teams. The movement of this open source kind of looking at these metrics for the most part, and there was no behavior analysts that I found in that movement, but they were all soaked up. Everything kind of stopped. Like there's still stuff out there, but for the most part, like the good organic movement stopped because everything went proprietary. And I realized same thing, RFID chips and this sort of technology was coming in and doing things that I would say the typical behavior analyst's contribution can run fucking laps around, right? Like when you're looking at that, and it's not that it's one of those things where there's still room for us conceptually and bringing in the right thinking like you're talking about. So I'm super interested in this sort of stuff. But when it came to someone saying, well, have we tried measuring, behaviors? It's like this industry is way past, thinking, how do we maybe measure X, Y, or Z or kind of automate things? For the most part, it's, you got to kind of coherently bring all of what we know about philosophy of behavior, philosophy of science behavior, as well as these different areas and kind of bring them together. So have you seen in, I was super stoked. I think I could have still pursued and had a lot of fun with this, but I would have had to take it to the degree that you all are, where it's like, we're bucking up and we're going for this as like we're going to be, the Renaissance company or in this industry, right? So have you ran into a similar thing in pro football? Like, is it just cutthroat, ruthless on everybody's chasing these metrics like Moneyball back in the day?
That the challenge with the NFL is it's such a game. I mean, we think of baseball in this way, but in football, with the people in it, let me say this: Major League Baseball very quickly filtered out the Bobby Coxes and the Bobby Valentines and those managers who as the saying goes, they manage from the gut. Right. And now all the manager has to do is open up the binder that the guys from MIT hand them and make the decisions based off of that. Football is still filled with Bobby Coxes and guys who have that old school sort of mentality where it's by feel, it's by guts, by emotion. And which is not always a bad thing, by the way. I want to make that very clear. I actually don't think that we should remove humanity from the game, especially when it's a bunch of humans who are doing the actions themselves and a bunch of humans who are in the stands watching it. I think that humanity is cherished by the fans. But the challenge I've seen, I can tell I worked with a defensive end.
Mental toughness.
Exactly, yeah.
Measure that. Measure that shit.
Toughness. You have to have the will.
Mental toughness, baby.
So I work with a second-year defensive end in the NFL, and in his rookie season, he had come off a game where he had 45 snaps. Okay, and in those 45 snaps, he had like 11 pressures. He had a sack. You know, a really, really great game. The first practice after that game, he had, I think he messed up an assignment in practice preparing for the next week. And because he was a rookie, because he made that mistake, the coach didn't have trust in him. And so the next game he has 7 snaps, right? 45 to 7. Yeah. 45, and he's highly productive on a per snap basis. And then 7 snaps.
Well, they operate on a hot hand fallacy like a mother. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And so you see this situation now, and here's a player now who's like, he's new to the league. He's kind of like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I just crushed it. What do I even take away from this? Because it's also not like you get to sit down and have these heart to hearts with your coaches, right? You're in a meeting with your coach, in a team meeting, and you get told this is what you're doing this week, and you kind of just take it and move on. And so you're kind of left to wonder, what do I do? What does this mean? Like, was I terrible? I don't understand. And so to answer your question is, yeah, that's all over the league right now, especially at the position coach level. I would say head coaches are much more accepting of analytics, but they're accepting of it in a situational basis on the field and a decision-making process, not so much in a player performance process. The player performance aspect is still based on measurables and traits, right? So they go to the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, and who runs a fast 40-yard dash, and who does X amount of reps on the bench press, and all these different things.
Nonsense fucking metrics.
Yeah, and so that still kind of rules the day in player performance and player selection. What doesn't necessarily come into play, where analytics does come into play is, should I go for it on 4th and inches inside the 30? Should I go for a 2-point conversion or kick the extra point? That's where analytics is right now, mostly in the NFL. They're not looking, I could tell you for a fact.
They use it for strategic thinking, not personnel decisions.
Exactly.
Strategic thinking, not personnel
and
decisions.
I could tell you firsthand that one of the biggest, I would say, they're backed by NBC. Big investor is Chris Collinsworth. It's Pro Football Focus, right? If you ever, and in the future, maybe you haven't, but Sunday Night Football is on NBC. And the second a player makes his announcement that he's in the game, right? They do this little introduction thing. He says, "Hey, I'm Drew Brees from Purdue," and then next to his name is the Pro Football Focus grade, which is a sports metrics company. And I can tell you the teams don't put any stock in what they're coming up with. Those grades mean nothing to the teams themselves. I was texting with an agent for one of the players that I work with, and he asked me if I had any data I could give him. And I didn't realize he was asking me for my data, because this was like early on in my career doing this with players. Who the fuck am I? So I sent him over the Pro Football Focus grades that had come out. And he said to me, "Is this Pro Football Focus?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "This doesn't mean shit to me. If I walked into a general manager's office with Pro Football Focus grades when I was negotiating a contract, they'd laugh me out of the room." But that hasn't stopped Pro Football Focus from being the most popular sports metrics grading company among the fans. But the teams themselves don't put any stock in it. And so if we can come in, now I don't know what it would take to get to this level, but I sure as shit wouldn't be upset if it did get to this level. There is room for guys like us to come in and say, "Hey, here's some value-based metrics inside the context of your team," right? And this can maybe help you make better personnel decisions. Maybe we are there at practice and we're doing some precision teaching and we're doing some standard acceleration, because that's how this all came about. Is I was doing this with the players I worked with at Biokinetix. That's how this came to Pro Football Network, because I was doing this with the guys I was working with at Biokinetix. I said, "Hey, we should be getting this into print." And so when I had the opportunity to buy into Pro Football Network, I said, "Hey, this is going to be what I do here." And the cool thing was I was doing it with my special needs kids, right? I was doing all this type of stuff and data collection and standard acceleration charting and performance measurement in the realm of athletics and sports with my special needs population. And that's what led me to want to do it with pro football, with pro football players, because it's science. Doesn't matter if you have autism or if you're an elite athlete. If you have a skill that you need to acquire, this science is very helpful for helping you do it. And so once we proved that jump, special needs to pro athlete, now it was about, okay, can we get that out to the masses? Can we help the football viewing audience understand what player performance can look like, what player performance measurement can look like, and can it help them, understand the game better, participate in their fantasy football leagues better, and things like that.
Brett, you're a BCBA?
I'm sorry?
You're a BCBA?
Not yet. Not yet. Full disclosure, not a BCBA yet. I have taken.
Do you want some friendly advice?
Yeah, I do.
You want to read a lot of shit on behavioral dynamics, and you want to start building that kind of language into your pitch.
Okay.
Because these motherfuckers are the type of people who respond to, fantastic language of relative, exponential growth and dynamics and that kind of bullshitty stuff.
Yeah.
And the notion of behavioral dynamics in general would also potentially open you up to some models that might be able to help you with your predictive stuff that you're trying to do.
I appreciate that. I would definitely, start to get into that.
Like that behavioral momentum theory, not behavioral momentum like you're reading in whatever master's program. I'm talking about behavioral momentum theory, and then generalized matching law, like the real shit, and behavioral dynamics research. That shit, because those are all based on a bunch of experimental analysis stuff that produces clear-cut models, predictive models of behavioral responding that you might be able to adapt to whatever you got going on and shortcut some of the individual proprietary shit you're trying to do right now.
Yeah, no,
because a lot of these models already exist. They use a lot of this shit in marketing already, actually. So you could probably just snag it and shift it and use it into performance stuff and get some get amazing results. But anyway, that's just a guy who's talked to you for 3 minutes. So.
No. Hey, look, I'm always. I think the best thing we can always do is keep learning and keep finding out new information. I'll be honest with you. I started my pursuit of board certification probably about 6 years ago when I was, a one-to-one aide in a public school. And, once I got the idea to start biokinetics and kind of leave the public education field and kind of start my own thing, because I, felt that there was a better way to deliver physical education to our most severely affected population, once you start a business, all of a sudden that takes on everything. And so I did finish my coursework finally through FIT, Florida Institute of Technology, this year, actually. So now it's just about sitting for the exam, which I will do.
Which I was going to say a while ago, but this needs to be super clear. Props, man. You're doing some really cool shit, dude.
Appreciate it.
When you said, Renaissance man, I'm like, I like the attitude here. Let's see if we can back it up. And
I know, this guy full of shit.
Dude,
That's the first thing that went through my head. I'm like, uh-oh. Come on, we got the man bun routine? What the fuck? All right, let's see where we go here. Let's see.
But he's backing it up. That's a
COVID-only thing, by the way. The man bun is temporary.
He's backing it up, though, dude. This is super cool, man.
Can I tell you why I'm so impressed with what you're saying?
Sure.
And why I asked you that you're a board certified behavior analyst? Because this demonstrates how much dogmatism that comes from the certified sequence, from the way people conceptualize behavior, and the narrow focus you get when all your training, all your mindset, all your understanding is through a singular lens. What I love about the way that you're talking about stuff is you took the ideas of behaviorism that you learned as some fucking dude who's delivering one-on-one services, and you learned what an acceleration chart was, and you learned how to take a count, and you played with it, and you extrapolated on it, and you didn't get held back by whatever dogmatic bullshit rules that you thought were real, when in reality there is no constraints on these things. The only constraints that exist are the ones that we apply to them. So I find that incredibly inspirational, and I love it, dude. You should keep doing whatever you're doing, for real.
I got to get back into football, man. I'm that stoked that I got to
go to ProFootballNetwork.com. If you're gonna get back in, start at ProFootballNetwork.com. But no, I will say this: having and I don't want to come off as disingenuous. This is as sincere as I can be. But and Ryan, I've been reaching out to you a few times, on various social platforms and stuff. It's honestly inspirational having guys like yourselves doing what you're doing, because no one else is doing content like this. No one else is doing the videos that you guys do, the pods that you guys do, talking about the things that you guys do, or Dimitri, like the whole mindset you just talked about me having. There aren't enough guys who appreciate that type of a mindset. I could tell you, I've been shunned in a lot of different behavior analysis circles, so to say, because I don't have those 4 letters next to my name yet.
You're probably doing better behavior analysis than most of them. Like that's the thing.
Let's just be clear. Being a board No, please finish, Ryan. I'm sorry.
It's like a true behavioral analysis of an event is what you're doing. You're saying, can I bring in a behavioral perspective, interpret it, understand it, measure it, and help improve things? Like that's living by the 7 dimensions, man. So I don't know. Like
ABA Tech G.
Yeah, dude. Just keep chasing it, man. I don't want to end this here. I feel like we're ending. We don't need to end yet, but like keep chasing it, you know?
We're not ending, but I was so blown away by this. Like I'd love to see some of the metrics just out of curiosity's sake now. And like I'll send you some articles and stuff if you'd like, so you can kind of get started on the matching line.
I absolutely would love it.
We've talked about that dogma stuff that runs into the field, man, and it's useful sometimes, but most of the times it's just getting in our own ways. And so I like that you keep pushing forward regardless of that. Hell yeah.
It's unfortunately not unique to, and I will tell you, we have a BCBA who kind of acts as like an advisor or like a mentor really to me, who's super embracing of, what he calls my forest through the trees type of mentality, right? Super embracing of that. And it's been very helpful. His name's Todd Kellogg. And he specializes in family counseling and a lot of different things, but he's just been really supportive of me. But, one of the things that, comes up a lot is I told him that's exactly the thing that chased me out of public education, was the dogma, was the following the script that we hand you when you walk in the door and you don't deviate. And one of my earliest experiences, I was a one-to-one aide with a kid who, the school district told me had severe autism. And I wanted to be a football coach. I didn't know shit about autism. I never even heard of it before. I just wanted to coach football at the school district. And they basically were like, well, you can't just coach. You got to do something else. And so I said, okay, what do you got? So you have to be a one-to-one aide for a 14-year-old with severe autism. I said, okay, I just got to follow him around and I can go coach football. Easy, done. Obviously, if you've ever worked with anyone who has severe autism, that is not what my job was. I was not trained, had no idea about behavior analysis, had no idea about restraint training, and I was getting my ass kicked every day for $12,500 a year. And it was rough. And the reason I'm bringing that up is just I started to I had heard about ABA. I started to really do some reading and getting into some really high level shit. And I went to the superintendent for special ed because I had come across a study that seemed like it would be really effective for this particular kid that I was working with, who had really aggressive and self-injurious behaviors. But it was going to cost the district $3,000 to train us all on how to do it. And when I went in there and I said, hey, look what I found. Like, we should do this. This would be great for this kid. And she said to me, we're a public school. We don't provide the ceiling. We provide the floor. We're not optimal. We're appropriate. And I was like, what? What does that even mean? Like, what other industry functions that way? Right? Could you imagine Microsoft saying, you know what, we're not going to give you the best version of Windows because we're going to give you the worst version because it's fair and you'll buy it anyway. But that really is what chased me out of working in the public school system. And then I went and worked at a private school as a behavior consultant, and I repeatedly got asked to turn my passion down. I was too passionate. And so those things really stuck with me. And I was like, it's got to be a better way of doing this. And so I figured, okay, what do I love? What am I good at? Football, sports in general. And so I'm just going to start a company that does it the way I think works and is a better way. And we'll let the market decide. We'll let the customers and consumers decide. And that's kind of how this all got started. But it's about this idea of where dogma and and the traditional way and all these things sort of infiltrate, and they take away the creativity of us to be able to go out there and do some really dynamic things and some amazing things. So hopefully this starts a trend. And Ryan, when I first joined your Facebook group, one of the questions on there is like, what area of behavior analysis would you like to see sort of expanded on and talked about? And, you know, I put entrepreneurship because at my heart, I think that's kind of what I am and sort of what got me on the path. And I think entrepreneurship, that mindset is needed in this field to kind of have people start creating businesses in established industries, but businesses that, you know, follow more of a behavior analytic model and bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, man, there's endless possibilities if people are willing to strap up and approach it from that sort of angle, right? We'll see. I think we'll see this. I mean, you see this in a lot of different industries, different fields. Like, not a ton of people go that route because it's not easy by any means to build something like that. But, dude, the juice is worth the squeeze, even if you fail, right? It's so rewarding to chase those sort of things.
Big time.
So, you know, it's been.
I mean, if this thing hits, here's the thing: if you figure it out and you don't fuck up, like, you're buying yachts. I'm not joking.
No,
I'm not joking.
You know,
I mean, like, if it fails, it fails, obviously. So I mean, like, the risk reward is pretty big. No. I mean, that's a pretty big bounce. I mean, like, still, if it does work for real, I mean, like, don't forget the little people.
No, I already got to give you a cut. But from a business perspective, you know, let's just talk business for a second. You know, business mindset. You know, one of the things, my godfather, his name's Glenn, same last name, Glenn Yarris. And, you know, he stopped me from not doing this. I was actually going to leave the field altogether because I couldn't take the way the schools worked. I was actually going to work at ESPN. He had, you know, helped me get an interview there. But he was like, dude, I've been chasing the dollar my entire life, and I promise you it'll be there. I was 25 or 26 at the time. And he was like, you're doing some good stuff for some good people. Like, find a way to do that. Keep doing that. And so he actually kind of helped push me and you know, he helped me create biokinetix and what we're doing. And he does a lot of help, you know, with me on Pro Football Network as well. But from a business perspective, one of his great insights, because I had no business experience, was, you know, let's try to be cash flow positive from day one. Let's do this organically and slowly so we can make sure that we do it correctly. So when the time comes to push it out there and bring some capital in, or however we go about doing that, we have a clear vision for what that capital is going to be used for, and it helps keep us efficient. And so he always said he felt that this business was recession proof because, you know, while people could look at it as personal training, it's when you ask parents of kids with special needs, what are the, you know, one of the most things that they come back with what is really worrisome for them is the health and inactivity of their children, right? And so we always felt that we'd be able to be a viable service even in a recession. What I didn't know is that we would face a pandemic within the first 3 years, and what would that do to our business? And because of some game planning, some game theory, we put out, you know, some predictive plans in place, and luckily we've been going strong. And so, to just bring it a full circle for a second, we haven't lost a dime in revenue, right? So we've created this thing that does make money, right? And the reason I put that out there is because one of the things I've done a lot of talking about, I've done town halls with Autism Speaks and other organizations where I've talked about parents needing to stop relying on the public dollar, because the public dollar is not worth as much as it used to be in special education. And that goes back to my conversation with the superintendent for special ed, where she says, we don't provide the ceiling, we provide the floor. Well, let's help parents want the want the ceiling again, right? Let's help parents understand that they can get optimal services. And hey, how can I guarantee you that the service I'm providing to your child is optimal? I'm also providing the same exact service for NFL players, the best athletes in the world. And so that was sort of our pitch going in. And, you know, it's been super helpful to keeping us viable. And so I think we have a pretty good business, right? Not just a great service that uses a great science, but it's a great business. And one of the things we always hope to be able to do was, hey, look, the first thing you hear on Shark Tank from venture capitalists, right, is how do I get my money back? How am I going to make my money back that I give you? And we've been cash flow positive from day one. We want investors to know that you can invest in a company that works with special ed and doesn't have to be a nonprofit. You can invest in a company like that and get your money back. You can make money in this market, in this field. And that's something else we're kind of hoping to prove and see if we can push out there into the entrepreneurial mainstream.
So yeah, I think this market's definitely going to have to make people think a lot more entrepreneurial if they want to be competitive in life.
And it's so like you said, like it's putting your business, something like this is putting businesses to the test. But this is where your entrepreneurship skills or business skills are made or not, right? Or like, I was talking with my dad when this thing first hit and trying to predict a little bit as to like how bad it was going to be for some of the stuff that I do. And because I guess mainly I was just kind of like, like what's the recessions feel like? And because I was too dumb to really pay attention in the last turn down and things like that, and really feel it. But I always knew from watching other people's content also, like one of them is Gary Vaynerchuk, man. He's like, you can build the biggest building in town. You can especially build something big when the economy's good. And so it's one of those things where I think a lot of behavior analysts are going to be hitting the jaw. They already have been, but we're really going to be pushed to the test across industries on how well you can do it. In business, man, no matter how much you want to hate it, that's like I did a minor in it in undergrad mainly because anywhere I was going to go, having that knowledge was going to be useful, man. Everywhere. So I wish it was a bigger topic in our field, not just like I want to start a business to make more money or have control, but just understanding the role it plays in influencing behavior in general. Going back
we really jumped full in with Pro Football Network. So part of my role there as strategy was actually strategy from a behavior analytic perspective, right? So our revenue model is actually a pay for performance model. And what that's allowed us to do is pay people based upon the amount of revenue they are responsible for bringing into the company. And for a media company, that's pretty easy to decipher because each person writes their own article, and that one article makes X amount of dollars. And so when you see companies like Sports Illustrated firing all kinds of people, and you have The Athletic, which is a big athletic publication, aptly named, they're laying off a ton of people. ESPN laying off a ton of people. We haven't had to let anybody go. People aren't making as much money as they did because ad revenue is down in general, but they're making something. We haven't had to let anyone go from the company. In fact, we've made 3 hires in the last week because we took a behavior analytic approach to how we deal with our revenue for Pro Football Network. And so that's allowed us to keep going.
You didn't get in over your head with the cash flow positive mentality.
Yeah. And you can't, you have to, everything's a balance, but from us, and I actually took that from Glenn, from my godfather. And one of the things he's always said is we got to make sure that we're not spending more than we make, right? How do we keep our overhead down? How do we scale while keeping our overhead down? And Pro Football Network was easy to do that because it's all remote, right? So we don't have a central office. Everyone's working from home. And we have people who write for us from England, New Zealand, Australia, all over the world. I didn't even know people cared about American football that far out. But from a business perspective, we haven't had to let anybody go. We haven't had to tell anybody we're not paying. We can't pay anymore because we're crumbling in this environment. Behavior analysis can help save a lot of industries. A lot of people are struggling right now in an unpredictable situation as this is. But there are behavior analytic models out there that could help you survive because even if revenue comes down, you're maybe not making as much as you were, but you're not making zero, right? And there's so many people out there, over 40 million people in America now who are making zero because of this.
And if anybody's critiquing or thinking about this right now, like the other crazy thing there is the NFL is, first of all, like not in season, but a lot of these places, like they canceled the season. And so like I guess the people might argue, I feel like it'd be easy to argue like, oh, that's so different than our industry. But like those industries were wrecked just as hard, right? In the pro sports world as a result of this.
Yeah, people don't know this, but NFL players right now, because they're not in season and because the season may get kicked down the road a little bit, they're not getting paid right now. it's not like a 9 to 5, or even as a teacher, right? If you're a 10-month employee, you can choose to get paid on a 12-month schedule, right? But NFL players are not getting paid right now. Even the ones who just signed contracts and all these things, they don't get paid till the season starts. And so if the season keeps getting delayed, these guys are not making any money in their bank account. And yeah, if you're a Drew Brees or a Tom Brady or some of these guys who've been in the league for 10 years and you've been able to build up your bank accounts because you've been good with your money, yeah, you're okay. But if you're a rookie last year, or you're a second-year player or a third-year player, and you haven't, you're playing on a much reduced contract, because I don't know if people know this, but rookies come in, they don't get to get a huge contract. They get slotted into a predetermined amount, and then once they get through 4 to 5 years of their career, then they can sign these big mega contracts. So these young players,
yeah, but the sign-on bonuses are sickening.
They are, but you know what? The young guys don't get that. The rookies don't get these big signing bonuses.
Football is a unique sport where it's not guaranteed money.
Yeah. So, but my point is that a lot of people don't realize these players aren't getting paid right now, and so in terms of this wrecking these industries, yeah, the NFL is $1 billion business. Each owner this past season cashed a $252 million check. That's 32 owners times $252 million that they got as payment for being an owner of an NFL team. And you have a player, sitting somewhere in Indianapolis or in Buffalo, New York, who is his second year in the league. He's making $950,000 for the year, but he's not getting any of that right now because the season's not in. And if it gets delayed, that's unplanned for time of not receiving any income. So it's just a tough situation all around. And again, if we took more unique and creative outside the box approaches to revenue, to business, maybe some of this stuff could have been avoided, right? I'm not advocating for a Walden 2 type of, utopia, but there is a way to make sound business decisions that are maybe a little bit more conservative on the front end, but on the back end, like now, you're better off.
Yeah. I was taught, I don't remember where, but like 6 months of reserves is something you should be sitting on. And most people that I talk to in behavior analysis are like, that's absurd. And I get that's a lot of cash. But I don't know.
The average American doesn't have more than, can't afford an unanticipated $400 expense.
No, for sure. But I think the thing I resonate with you on here, Brett, is I had a similar model, and so I focused on self-employed, reducing my overhead, things like that for just my own business, my own LLC.
Sure.
And my number one goal from the time I left my job to doing that full time, it took me about 18 months, was like to build a cushion of 6 to 9 months of my business operating expenses. And that was just, if I needed to, something hit, I just cut back and do the bare minimum what I need to do. And I can keep moving forward in my day to day and not have to be stressing for that period. And again, didn't expect it was going to be this, but that I think there's a lot of value if anyone's listening out there and considering business stuff of being conservative where you can. And I'm really nervous for our field, for folks that were just in over their head on things, man. And of course, this wasn't what it was going to be predicted, but like the market swings sometimes, and it's going to scar people up or put people completely out of business.
And it's not the thing that, us as the, and if anyone listening out there is not in what I'm calling the middle and lower classes, right? God bless you. But for those of us that are operating in that medium, right, financially, we can take lessons from these bigger corporations, right? The airline industry is one to really take something, from. And, they made $28 billion in profit last year. They made out really handsomely with the 2017 tax cuts. But what they do with that money, they didn't put it in reserves, right? They put it into stock buyback so that they could, pay their executives even more money up front. Well, guess what? A pandemic hits, something they're not prepared for. They don't have the money that they actually saved and were kind of gifted 2 years ago in reserves. They spent it all, right? And so now they have their hand out again, looking for more money from the government. Where you look at these tech firms, you look at Apple, you look at Microsoft, you look at Google, The tech firms are doing exactly what you advocated, Ryan. They have, Apple is sitting on close to $1 trillion in liquid cash. And that's absurd on its face, right? But
yeah,
that's what they do, right? They take their money and they're really good about finding ways to put it away.
I think there's lessons from these other areas, I guess, and
they're also really good at avoiding taxes. So
yeah,
it's true. It's true.
That is true. But
I mean, Amazon paid $0 in federal taxes.
But here's the game.
I hear you,
man.
But
the game is that is unfortunately the game that is set up and out there. I'm not advocating that people need to go out there and play it that hard by any means, but I feel like one thing that's missed in the behavioral analytic community is really paying attention to outside sources that really understand this, that are not behavior analysts. So if your only go-to in business is Abernathy and his approach, or Aubrey Daniels, then I really question you, right, as a behavior analyst.
Those guys are like organizational whatever, like systems guys. I mean, you're talking about managing finances. Those are very different things.
Well, that's it. I think this kind of circles back in the dogma discussion on it's pretty easy to be told, you do your pay for performance, it's like this, and your business is going to be awesome, and there's more to it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So
that's
props.
I guess my thing is this, is that I hear you on all that stuff, and I was a lot more into the whole bootstrapping it routine there, for a while, and I have to say that I was going against what I really believed in, and I don't disagree with some of the stuff, and I do believe that entrepreneurship matters, and I also believe that people should work hard to not be dependent on other people for a paycheck. If you can figure that out, you should absolutely do that. Am I breaking up, or is it fine? But I do think that we got to be a little bit real about the unique times we live in too right now, in terms of what that means for people and the reality of that, and also the impact of it, etc. Because it took the New Deal and a world war to get us out of the Great Depression. Okay, and now that created a historical cascade of the military industrial complex that's basically been kind of a pillar of the economy that we don't really know about. I mean, this forever war isn't by accident. It's by design. It's necessary to keep the engines of capitalism moving. So Eisenhower warned about it. Okay, and it's the reality. There's a reason why the budget keeps growing every year and that kind of thing. So if you move into another historical catastrophic event like this, and you make a reasonable comparative analysis of those things across, timelines, it would say that there's going to need to be some semblance of a cooperative effort to get out of this. I think it's unreasonable to assume that individuals are necessarily going to be able to do this completely on their own. Because I think there's going to be, unless you're willing to suffer the reality, unless as a society, you're willing to suffer the consequences of that and let go of a certain portion of your population, which will not be able to do that. Now, if you want to take that kind of social Darwinistic perspective, I get it. That's not you, but someone wanted to, that libertarian hardcore perspective. I get that shit, and I don't think it's wholly rational, but I think that it lacks. It lacks humanity, and it also lacks ultimately, what's the point of this thing? In my mind, I think about what is the ideal future, and I always think Star Trek, man. The ideal future is a fucking spaceship with machines that make shit that whatever I want it, whenever I want it, and I get to pursue whatever I want based on my interests and values. So and everyone should be able to do that no matter what. So how do we create that future? And I think the rugged individualism to the extreme anarcho perspective, I just think that's leading us down a dark path that if shit does hit the fan, we're a lot closer to Mad Max than we are Star Trek. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, well, I think the big, and first of all, I think I agree with so much of what you just said, and I think for us, what we have to recognize too is, in America, we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, right? We're trying to, advocate this rugged individualism, but also doing a massive amount of government intervention. And we're not marrying the two in a cohesive way. We're trying to pretend that those two things aren't happening at the same time, and they are. And that's where we're in this big issue. So don't for a second think that because I am advocating what the tech firms did with being able to sit on cash reserves and however they did it, right? Obviously, if it was through nefarious means, not a fan of that. But that's not me equating to saying that our current system is great. Just be more like the $1 billion tech firms. My feeling is very much we need to help our communities be much more. I don't want to say self-reliant, but we do need them to be a little bit less reliant. I want to just clarify. I grew up very poor. Okay. I grew up with a single mom, very, very poor, basement apartment to basement apartment. We didn't turn the heat on in the winter because the bill was too high, all those types of things. And I am so much further up the caste system now than when I started. And it's not because I did it all myself. Okay. It's because I had a ton of support from family, from friends, teachers, an incredible support system. And what that taught me is it's not any one person, right? People are successful. Yes, they do things with their skills, their individual skills, but you need a support system to help you foster those skills, shape those skills, and develop into something that can truly be great. And then, yes, it's on you to take that and go far with it. But there's a massive amount of people who aren't getting that support. And if they're not getting it from their families or their communities, they got to get it from somewhere if they're going to be healthy and happy. And so we got to definitely figure that out.
I mean, when you talk about a country of 350 million people, right, and you're talking about 30% unemployment, which gives you about a round figure number. What right now, I think it's 30 million people applied for unemployment in the last 6 weeks. Okay, on top of the whatever 3-4%, but that's a bullshit number because they don't calculate people that aren't working for work. So the real number, the aggregate figure, I think right now is sitting around between 14.9 to 27% because of depending on what model you use. Yeah, so that goes anywhere from like a moderate percentage of the population to a crazy one. Okay, and okay, and at the height of the Great Depression, I believe it was about 15. So we're right at that figure.
Yeah.
So when you look at those things, and then you look at a bell curve of distribution of just capacity. Right, because I mean, like we can talk about behavior analysis all we want, but I mean the reality is that people are limited by their capacity. Right, their morphology, physiology, and then intellectual acuity is built into the evolutionary pie. Right, so I mean, like there's gonna be those percentiles on the bell curve that are not necessarily going to be able to function at a level that might necessarily be able to achieve those ends or those goals. So then, like, it's incumbent on us to be able to do that. So I think that, like, and it seems and I'm actually one of those people, and I'd like to say that I'm on the other side of the bell curve, but I seem to have shifted in that one. So maybe I'm a moron. I didn't even realize it. But I mean, the thing is that, like, which is totally true, by the way, for the listeners out there, I'm a fucking idiot. But I mean, like, the point that I'm trying to make here is that, like, all the stuff we're talking about, especially like billion-dollar tech companies and that kind of thing, most of those guys are coming from a hyper-rational, anarcho-capitalistic perspective. Okay, they're libertarians to the extreme. So what does that mean? They believe in free markets. They believe in all this stuff. However, we don't exist in that system, number one. Number two is that individual response effort absolutely matters, and it is incumbent on you to do what you can with the resources and stuff you have. 100%. I agree with you on that because I wasn't giving shit either, but I mean, like, so I get where you're coming from, and I totally agree with your perspective. And it does take a certain level of grit. You know, you got to have that grit, right? You got to be able to get kicked straight in the sack and be able to get up and keep moving forward, and then kicked in the sack again, and told how awful you are, and then think about your dad, and then, like, have this whole, like, circular thing, and, like, oh, fuck you, Mom. I mean, I love you. I mean, you know, like, you have to do that whole thing, right? So, but I mean, like, ultimately, what matters, you know what I mean, is, like, does it have to be that way is the question that it leads you to in my mindset, right? Like, the nice thing about, like, the back to the tech company things, like, the tech companies are also the biggest advocates for universal basic income. And, like, I donated money to Andrew Yang's campaign. I read his book. I told Ryan to read his book. He's an advocate for universal basic income. Nice. I love that. But I mean, like, you know, the more I learn about it, the more I'm thinking, okay, right now it's a good thing, but why are tech companies advocating for universal basic income? Well, because they're habituating us to obsolescence. So I mean, like, they're like, hey, get comfortable with being unemployed, because when we're done building the right kind of robots, all you motherfuckers are going to be unemployed. So you're going to need something.
I love that, actually.
I mean, well, that's maybe
what's interesting. What's interesting is, and just to Skinner called himself a technologist, right? That's why technology and technological is a dimension of what we do. And I once heard Mark Zuckerberg call himself a technologist, right? And the way Skinner talked about being a technologist was using systems to make a better path forward for everybody, right? That was how he defined being a technologist. And I listen to Mark Zuckerberg. For those of us listening who don't somehow know who he is, right? The founder of Facebook. He talks about himself that way, and I would almost argue he's the opposite of what Skinner envisioned for a technologist to be, because there's a big case to be made that the technology coming out, or the way in which it's being offered to us to use it, right, is not the better way forward. And one of the things I think would be fascinating for us to examine is, where could behavior analysis be used in government to make government more responsive, make it more effective, make it more efficient. And I don't just mean like efficient in the budget, right? Making the food stamps program more efficient, right? The rallying cry we hear a lot on the conservative side. But certainly making it more responsive to the needs of individual communities, because we are a population of 350 million, and we're a population of millions of different communities that are so bad. I live in the state of New York, right? New York City and Buffalo could not be more different. One might as well be Earth. The other one might as well be Jupiter. Okay. But they live in the same state. And so there's so many things I think that we could do to really move the population forward if we found a way to scale back on certain government things, but we scaled up on other government things. You mentioned the military-industrial complex. That's a government program, right? That's government spending. It's government spending on things that the military itself doesn't even want, right? But we still spend billions of dollars on that shit, right? And we spend more than the 25 countries after us combined, and 24 of them are allies of ours. And that's where our money's going. A behavior analyst could easily come and say, well, guys, that's not doing anything for anybody. It's not helping anyone. That's helping the defense contractors' pockets. But no one's doing that in our leadership roles. And so what would happen if someone like Andrew Yang, who look, I'm not here to advocate for him as president, but someone with that mindset as both an entrepreneur, as a technologist, who understands where the markets are going, where the industries are going, that's the kind of leader I think helps us get out of our current economic state. And so that's what I agree like with to you. See 100%. Side. Yeah.
I mean, Mark Cuban changed his tune. Mark Cuban's been on every single, talk, everything. Like, nope, UBI, social programs, New Deal. Oh my God, resurrect Roosevelt. Let's get some rituals going and some seances. I mean, dance. Yeah, whatever you got. Let's Weekend at Bernie's his motherfucking ass out of the grave. But I mean, I hear everything that you're saying, and I absolutely agree with that perspective. 100%. That's where it's like, at what point in time does it become politics and not science? I don't know. And those models do exist, and the only people that are involved in that up until now are using it for nefarious purposes, right?
Yeah. For sure.
We talked on our podcast. We talked about the great hack, which is the use of behavioral science to manipulate, voting outcomes, elections. Yeah. Okay, and what did they do? They caused the largest Overton window shift. And for those of you that don't know what the Overton window is, the Overton window is the conceptual roadmap of a society. It's what people consider extremes in terms of boundaries, right and left. Okay, the American Overton window, when compared to other Overton windows, is shifted multiple standard deviations to the right. So even our lefties in other societies would actually be considered righties. But here we call them communists. That's incorrect, because it's our Overton window. Our perspective is incorrectly swung and manipulated over beyond what would be a more conventional natural line. So I mean, why does that matter? Because if you can continue to shift a window, continue to shift narratives, use verbal behavior to manipulate overt responses over time through various algorithmic manipulations, which is what they do on social media, IEC Cambridge Analytica. Okay, and go watch The Great Hack on Netflix. To those people who haven't heard that episode, you can absolutely change history. You can manipulate movements. You can manipulate people, and you can use that data also. It's crazy.
I believe it was 17 different countries' elections that they affected, or something like that. Before really being caught and exposed, and I'm sure it's just kind of shifted elsewhere.
They got so good at the data, they could figure out that, you know what, we don't even need to convince people here because we can't convince them. So we just need to get them to become so apathetic they won't even bother to vote. So like they could even get to the point where they just extinguished it. Like, it was so funny. Yeah. So it's sickness, man. So I hear you. Like, who's the guy using the science for? Who's the guy using our science for the light side of the force? Is what you're saying? And nobody.
But that's it's up to people actually having the balls to step out and try to push it forward.
Right. It's that idea of being bold, right? Where's that?
And recognizing that when you do that, you're probably going to get slapped in the face by the dogmatists that are out there, and you need to keep moving forward, right?
100%. And that's why I love what you're doing, bro.
And I very much. I mean, look, I hope that we make some positive impact somewhere and for somebody. And I'm not saying that football and what I currently do with biokinetics is going to be the end of it, right? I mean, look, anytime an opportunity presents itself, you got to look at it. But I think it goes back to the idea of being bold, of taking chances and understanding you're going to get shit for it. And I think, you look at a guy like Andrew Yang, when he first started, man, he was a punchline. He was a joke to a ton of people. And he knew that was going to be the case. He took that risk, and all of a sudden now you have Mitt Romney on the floor of the Senate saying we need to be doing universal basic income. You have Justin Amash, a congressman, a staunch libertarian, advocating for universal basic income. And you have this because you had somebody who was bold enough to take a shot, to put his name out there, put his hat in the ring, and go chase some glory. And I think that's what we don't do a lot in America anymore, right? We don't go out and chase glory anymore. We don't take the stand. We hope that someone on Twitter is going to do it for us. And those are the things that are really frustrating. And the other thing you said about the Overton window and our perspective of what left and right is versus other societies, that's another thing that is going on with this country that we don't do anymore. We don't leave our communities. We don't leave our bubbles. We have our own actual bubble, our neighborhoods, our communities, our regions, if you will. And then we escape to social media where we jump into another bubble, right? We're not going out there and seeing these incredible different communities that are so different from us in these different areas, not just of the world, but even in our own country. And when you don't have the exposure to that different way of thinking, to that different way of living, it's not even about thinking, it's about living. Other people live differently. And when you don't see that, okay, quick story, and I hope I'm not running you guys over on time here.
No, you're good. I do have to slide out shortly, but I want you two to keep going and wrap it up. I got another phone call soon.
Yeah, so this last story is just when Trayvon Martin died, one of my best friends, his name is Brett too, Brett Diggs, and he's black, and I always kind of sympathized with stuff that was going on, but like I never felt it, like I think you get angry, right? You get like mad that happened, but you don't feel it because you've never gone through it. And the night that the verdict came in where Zimmerman was found not guilty, I was picking Brett up from the White Plains train station, and he jumped in the car and he was like crying. I was like, yeah, man, this sucks, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, dude, before we go, I got to make a phone call. And he calls his mom and he tells her to keep his younger brother in the house. Okay. Because he's afraid riots are going to break out. And he's petrified that that's what's going on in his mind. It's like, holy shit, I will never feel that. I'll never have to make that phone call. And being exposed to somebody who had a different lifestyle, a different background, different upbringing, brought that to the forefront for me. And all of a sudden it changed my perspective on a lot of different things. It went from just being kind of, oh man, that sucks, but you know what? I'm going to wake up and go to work and my life's not any different. Whereas Brett didn't know Trayvon. He didn't know any of that, but his life was different because his community is a little bit different in that regard, right? His culture is a little bit different in the things that he's been exposed to and the things he's had to live through. And so understanding those things has kind of helped with perspective. And so I would encourage everyone just to get out, go travel. And I know traveling is expensive, but you know what? It doesn't cost anything to drive upstate in your state, drive to a different part of the state, go eat the local food, go meet some of the local people, take a day or two to go do that. And I think we'd be better off for it. And couple that with some bold leadership who pushes some programs that maybe incentivize us to do that. And maybe we're talking, but it starts with someone being bold and taking that first step.
Yeah, I mean, I think that getting out of ideological bubbles is kind of like what we try to do, man. When we talked about what the point of our exercise is, we want to break people out of their behavioral matrix, which, I mean, you know, we have a couple people that come on the podcast and talk about dogmatism a lot, and we talk about it a lot. And in general, the world just is very rigid that we live in, and we do need to. This is presented a natural opportunity to kind of like break some of that stuff down, and also just try to live a little bit more authentically and just be a little bit more honest about where we should be and what we should be doing. I mean, we don't use the word morality a lot, but I mean, like these are moral questions. You know, these are they are questions about the existence and of us as people and the reality of us as a society and where we need to be and where we need to go. And if your moral compass is so broken that you don't see the need to be able to participate in a collective system in some capacity while still maintaining the principles of individual achievement, then you're missing the point of this whole living thing.
Yeah, 100%. You're missing. And not to nationalize it, but you're missing the point of America. You know, I mean, and I think, you know, there's so much conjecture out there about what being American is, what it means to be an American, and you know, I think at its simplest format, that's what it is. It's pulling yourself up to be part of a greater collective, and just that simple concept is lost, and it's twisted, and it's, you know, beaten down into something entirely different depending on who the speaker is. And it starts with just caring. You know, it starts with caring about more than just what's going on inside your four walls, and having an idea of what you can do to affect great change and great outcomes, achieve great outcomes, right? Engage in something that creates an outcome for yourself, but it creates an outcome for the people around you. And maybe it creates an outcome for people that are outside of your personal bubble. You know, not every business does that. Not every job does that, but it doesn't have to be a job. You don't have to get paid for it. Okay. And I think that's something we don't talk about enough, perhaps, as behaviorists, which is the intrinsic value, the intrinsic motivation of doing something good. And I don't mean in the cliche, like hold the door open for somebody and that's your random act of kindness. I mean, legitimately doing something worthwhile. Right?
Yeah, the satisfaction that comes from engaging in a beautiful interaction for someone without looking for a tit for tat. Yes,
absolutely. You know, go if you live near a metro city, go take, you know, some clothes you haven't worn in 2 months and find some people who are living, you know, unfortunately without homes, and hand them out. You know, on Thanksgiving in the morning, go stop at a soup kitchen. Right? It takes so little effort to do things like that. And I'm not trying to get on a high horse on a pedestal. There are things that I need to be better at, but I will tell you that at the core of everything we do, whether it's Pro Football Network, whether it's biokinetix, has always been the foundation of how we started, which was helping the individuals with special needs and tying everything back to that and understanding, you know, what working in that community has been like. And it's offered such a unique perspective on every other community I've gone and worked in. And so I think if people spent more time with those less fortunate than themselves, you know, that could be something that can help, you know, propel us forward, instead of us always thinking that we're in the lowest rung of the ladder right now. Everything bad is happening to us.
Well, I think what this, like, again, just to put a neat bow on this thing and come to a close that I think makes sense and brings it all together, is that social significance is both discreetly identified and aspirational. It's not just, you know, a specific count, because when you get too lost in the numbers, you kind of lose people, man.
Perfectly said.
All right, my man. Hey, it was a pleasure talking to you, man.
Same,
Marvelous.
Man. Honor for me.
This was
I
marvelous.
Really do appreciate it.
This was a pleasure. All right. Thank you, everybody. Crushed, killer. Check out Brett, Pro Football Network, Biokinetix. What's it going to change to?
The behavior movement. The behavior
movement. And then social media stuff?
Yeah, you can just follow at PFN365, go to ProFootballNetwork.com. Tons of great behavior analytic content underneath the analysis tab. Check it out. I love feedback, boys.
All right. That's the game. Thank you.